Video games have many genres and historical periods, very similar to cinema, music, literature, and other forms of visual arts. Andy Warhol, with his pop art, revolutionized the landscape of the visual art scene in the 60s. French New Wave cinema, which emerged in the late 1950s, was a movement and new genre of filmmaking categorized by its rejection of traditional conventions, favoring experimentation and a rebellious spirit. Afrika Bambaataa pioneered and helped usher in a new genre of music known as hip-hop to the masses. His most popular song, Planet Rock, released in 1982, stands as one of the pioneering tracks of electronic music in hip-hop. When we examine the history of video games with a keen and meticulous eye, we uncover a rich tapestry of evolution, genres, and movements that rival those of any other art form. From the early stages of seeing top-down arcade shooters to the evolution of traditional side-scrollers from the home console era. Each era brought with it new technological advancements and creative breakthroughs, contributing to the vast and varied landscape of video game genres. For me personally, one of the most interesting genres of gaming that, to this day, still captivates me is the genre of rhythm-based games. And what is a rhythm-based game? Well, rhythm-based games are a type of music-themed video game that tests a player's sense of rhythm. Rhythm games usually involve dancing or pretending to play musical instruments, and players must press buttons or step on surfaces in some cases in a specific order that is shown on the screen. Many rhythm games offer multiplayer modes where players compete for high scores or work together as a virtual music group. These games often come with unique controllers shaped like musical instruments such as guitars and drums, which players use to match notes while playing songs. Some dance-based rhythm games require players to physically dance on a mat with pressure-sensitive pads as the input device. The rhythm genre of gaming almost feels like it was something that was born out of the early 90s of gaming and continued its popularity well into the mid-2000s. Games like Bust-A-Groove, Space Channel 5, and Guitar Hero, just to name a few. But the undisputed champion and one of the most well-known rhythm-based games ever is the 1997 release for the PlayStation, Parappa the Rapper. This was the game that brought rhythm-based games into the mainstream and perfectly set the tone of what a great rhythm game should be like, and has constantly been recognized in the video game industry as the grandfather of all rhythm-based games. It ushered in a new era of music-driven storytelling and spawned additional titles like Jammer Lammy in 1999 that takes place in the same universe as the Parappa character, and then later a sequel to Parappa the Rapper 2 in 2001. At the helm of the iconic game of Parappa the Rapper was the game's designer Masaya Matsuura. He is also the founder of the game development company Nana Onsha, which created the Parappa the Rapper series and is widely recognized for his pioneering work in the rhythm game genre. Now, I can't express to you how much of a big deal Parappa the Rapper was for me in my youth. This game, at the time, was revolutionary to me. Up until that point, I had never played a game like this, let alone something that had this style of graphics and art direction. It was, and still is, a big cultural phenomenon in my gaming life, and I still sing out most of these tunes at any given random moment. In the rain or in the snow, I got the funky flow, but now I really got to go. I mean, how could you not? Somewhere in between all these iconic game titles that Nana Onsha was creating was a game release that gamers in North America didn't have the option to play because it was never released in that site-specific region. Vib-Ribbon. another quirky, original, and completely unique rhythm-based game from the mind and team behind the Parappa the Rapper series. On December 9th, 1999, Vib-Ribbon was released in Japan for the original PlayStation, then later in Europe in September of 2000. However, despite its massive popularity in Japan and Europe, it did not see an official release in North America. I guess the question, of course, is why? Why would a game whose developer and studio had such a strong following in North America not release it in that region? There are, of course, a multitude of reasons as to why a game like this would not get a release in North America. A lot of it stemmed from the fact that Sony Computer Entertainment America was unsure about the game's commercial viability in the North American market. The game's minimalist graphics and unconventional gameplay was something that Sony felt at the time might not have appealed to the broader audience accustomed to more graphically intense and action-oriented games. We also need to remember that with Vib-Ribbon being released in 1999 and 2000, it meant that it was going up against the looming shadow of the PlayStation 2 release, and that most certainly would have eaten a lot of Sony's time in itself with not wanting to adapt it for a North American market. With Sony preoccupied with prepping for the next-gen games of the PlayStation 2, Vib-Ribbon seems to be another game title that became a victim of circumstances in the late Japan-only release on the cusp of the next-gen era of consoles that sadly never got its moment to shine in a worldwide release along with all the other game offerings of the Nana Onsha developed games. And so, with me being a long-time admirer of Masaya Matsuura rhythm games and a gamer who's always on the hunt to play games that were never released in North America, I needed to decide for myself, is Vib-Ribbon a game that deserves the same praise and recognition as a stellar title in the Nana Onsha library of games like the Parappa the Rapper franchise, or is it a game title that fits perfectly as a cult classic with a Japan and European only following? Subscribe to The Select Gaming to keep up to date with all our latest videos. This is Vib-Ribbon for The Select Gaming. At first glance, Vib-Ribbon appears deceptively simple with its basic black and white and geometric wireframed shapes. Yet within this seemingly rudimentary framework lies a world of catchy music and an unexpected challenge. Players take on the role of Vibri, a charmingly abstract rabbit traversing through dynamically generated obstacle choruses driven by original music in the game. And the graphics are something that you'll notice right away about Vib-Ribbon. Vib-Ribbon is essentially comprised of a minimal style with wireframe graphics. However, the look and gameplay of Vib-Ribbon was not always like this. Vib-Ribbon's original conception and origin story has a rather interesting one that started out as an advertisement for Mercedes. And you heard right, the luxury car brand Mercedes commissioned the creator of Parappa the Rapper to make a rhythm-based game for the Mercedes car brand. The project took flight soon after completion on Parappa the Rapper in 1996 for the PlayStation. It was then that Mercedes-Benz reached out to Sony after seeing the success of Parappa the Rapper, and their proposition was a bold yet simple one to Matsuura and his team. Mercedes wanted to promote their upcoming A-Class car in a promotional video game. Matsuura was yet again the creative mind behind the project. The first prototype of the game was a bold experiment that featured polygon graphics and a player character that was, intriguingly enough, a living automobile. The game's levels were constructed and unfolded as roads that mirrored the audio waveforms from existing music that was placed in the levels. The only existing footage or evidence I could find of the game itself is this small, measly little thumbnail that doesn't do all that justice in what I'm trying to convey. But overall, it's an idea that still does seem very intriguing and most definitely could have worked. However, fate had other plans. The A-Class car tested poorly overall with investors and potential customers in its research stages and caused Mercedes-Benz to withdraw from the gaming venture completely, thus killing anything and everything related to the A-Class vehicle, including its promotional game. With Vib-Ribbon, it just so happened to be a game that, rather than getting full out cancelled like so many other games in the position it was in, the team at Nana Onsha and Sony decided to give it new life as its own standalone title. It also makes it slightly more interesting that it was related and born out of such a luxury brand itself. So what is Vib-Ribbon, and most importantly, how does this game work? Like I mentioned before, the gamer takes on the role of Vibri, a cute, cheerful wireframe rabbit who moves through the world of Vib-Ribbon. The game is divided up into bronze, silver, and gold that represent a level of difficulty, with gold being the most challenging, and each tier has only 2 rounds in any given difficulty level. There is a beginning tutorial at the start of the game that playfully and intuitively gives you the basics of Vib-Ribbon, and it kind of goes something like this. Each round has an original music track that plays throughout the round, and the goal of the game is to match up the pushing of buttons to the certain line patterns that Vibri moves across as she runs down the wireframe path until the end of the round. Each wireframe pattern that Vibri runs across represents a different button on the PlayStation controller, and it's your job as the gamer to match up your timing of your button pushing with the wireframe pattern she runs over. As you can see from this chart, each of the wireframe designs represents a button on the PlayStation controller. The square hill means that you have to press the L1 button. A loop means you have to press the R1 button. The jagged lines means you have to press the X button, and the V line means you need to press the down button on the D-pad. In the more difficult gold tier stages, the wireframe symbols begin to do duo combos where you'll sometimes have to press 2 buttons at the same time as certain wireframe designs merge, and it's up to you to recognize those combinations as the game progresses. Now, this may sound difficult, but the intro tutorial actually does a pretty good job of easing the gamer into the logistics of the game, and just to convey it to you for a brief moment, an early section of Vib-Ribbon's rounds would logistically go something like this. When you break it down, the only buttons that you'll ever use in this game are L1, R1, down, and X. So just 4 buttons in total. On top of Vib-Ribbon being a rhythm game, it also acts as a bit of a game of memory and reflexes when the gamer is tasked at trying to remember what wireframe pattern belongs to what button on the PlayStation controller. Having the additional duo combos in the later rounds definitely makes for a more challenging rhythm-based game. Vib-Ribbon rewards the player when button presses are made at the precise timing of the wireframe designs. And the closer you are to pressing the button or buttons at the right time, you earn more points, and we'll even see Vibri evolve into her most highest form of a character to that of a queen, as we can clearly see that as a crown rests on top of her head and a regal wireframe cape appears, just to let the gamer know that you are doing a job well done in any given moment. However, if your button presses are off and you aren't following the rhythm of the song in correlation to your button presses, the game becomes a very wobbly wireframe world where it gets harder and harder to see the wireframe designs, and it may eventually lead you to destroying the wireframe world completely, where you'll then have to start all over again from the beginning of the round. You will also start to see Vib-Ri devolve into lower forms of her wireframe self to let you know that you are ruining her day until she ends up crying in utter defeat, all because you couldn't keep up with the rhythm. Vib-Ribbon's soundtrack is full of quirky and catchy tunes that match the game's unique style. The game's music was composed and created by the Japanese pop group Laugh and Peace in collaboration with Masaya Matsuura. The music combines lo-fi beats and fun melodies with complex rhythms, keeping players engaged and entertained throughout. The tracks embody an energy of upbeat J-pop with a side of experimental electronic sounds, a sound that was very reminiscent of the time with groups like the Chemical Brothers, Fatboy Slim, and I would even go so far as to say an album like Radiohead's Kid A. So the music in Vib-Ribbon is very topical for the time it was released in. Vib-Ribbon's music has such a distinct sound, and it is the perfect combination of melodies and tempo that comfortably complements the gameplay in terms of how it speeds up and slows down at any given moment. The music in the game are great electro-pop tracks and sync up so well with the gameplay overall. The soundtrack is a key part of the game's design, turning each level into an interactive audio-visual experience. Vib-Ribbon's music is something that greatly brings up the caliber of the game overall, and it's something that you would hope for a game that is heavily reliant on music as its main motivator. The simplicity of the game's graphics may not be for everyone, but the music is sure to be something that you either love or find somewhat interesting, especially if you're a fan of J-pop and electronic music. With all the wonderful music and intuitive but challenging gameplay that comes with Vib-Ribbon, there is unfortunately a massive downside to the game, and it comes in the form of its overall runtime. On a typical first playthrough of Vib-Ribbon, you're looking at finishing the game in about 20 to 35 minutes, and for many, including myself, that is criminally too short for a game that has such a unique and original concept out of the many rhythm games in existence. Not to mention that there isn't a narrative for the game itself, as it's simply all based off of gameplay in which, after you finish a round, you move on to the next round with no precursor or an actual ending or conclusion. At first, gamers at the time were probably all in agreement to Vib-Ribbon's disappointing length, especially when its release price translated to about $59.99 USD, and when you take into account inflation, that's a price tag of around $79 to $89 USD. For a game that lasts only about 20 to 30 minutes, that's just not going to go over well with the vast majority of gamers. But hear me out. The thing is, the game itself does not necessarily end after its final round. What sets Vib-Ribbon apart is its ingenious use of player-generated content with regards to the players being able to listen to their own music that they owned on CDs to then have it saved to the PlayStation console's RAM, where the game itself would then create new original levels based on the music's waveforms of songs. Instead of pre-defined levels, Vib-Ribbon would analyze the music on your music CDs that you inserted into the PlayStation console, then generated unique levels based on the rhythm and intensity of the tracks themselves. The gamer would begin this by inserting a music CD into the PlayStation console after Vib-Ribbon started up. Players would then take out the Vib-Ribbon game disc and put in their own music CD. The game would read the music and create a unique level based on the song's rhythm and beat. Once the CD was inside the PlayStation, the game would generate the new level instantly. Players could then pick any track from the music CD they inserted and start playing a level made just for that specific song. This feature made the game endlessly replayable, as players could keep trying new tracks for new challenges. By using their favorite music, players could make the game feel more personal and fun. In order to be able to have the game running and access the CD, the data would have to be stored in the PlayStation's internal RAM. And because the PlayStation's RAM was so small at the time, when we think about this in correlation to Vib-Ribbon's minimal wireframe graphics, it all starts to make perfect sense. You see, the game developers went with a simple look with the game's graphics to save space. Going into Vib-Ribbon, this was something that I did not originally know about the game, and I sort of was waiting to discover something about this game that would confirm to me as to why it has such a dedicated cult following and has been on gamers' radars ever since its release. Where the game fails in areas like its runtime and minimal graphics, it excels in its technical merits, the concept of user-generated content, and of course, its original soundtrack. This idea, to me personally, is such an innovative concept that still resonates with me even now. And I mean, you can kind of see how at the time this was such an innovative concept that still could even resonate with gamers nowadays. Imagine being an angsty 17-year-old coming home to play Vib-Ribbon with a Limp Bizkit track as the music you are playing to. The whole appeal in a feature like this would essentially have you going through your music collection and seeing what the game would come up with for a round of gameplay, and to me, that would have just made me appreciate the music I listened to even more. I've seen some amazing examples of this in play in some pre-existing videos on YouTube that gamers have uploaded, and they range from being heavy metal to classical music. It's genuinely impressive to watch and to see it in action, and I definitely recommend seeking those videos out. With a game like Vib-Ribbon, when we combine the short but sweet gameplay with this innovative concept of using your own music for endless replay value, we are left with a rhythm game that truly felt original and groundbreaking for the time. So what happened after the release of Vib-Ribbon for the original PlayStation? The world of Vib-Ribbon was expanded on with 2 sequels created for the PlayStation 2. The first sequel to Vib-Ribbon was Vib-Ribbon, released in 2003, with the second sequel, Vib-Ripple, released the year after in 2004. Both games were also Japan-only releases, and once again, both games had very unique and interesting concepts of its gameplay. With the 2003 release of Vib-Ribbon for the PlayStation 2, the gameplay focused on elements of traditional Japanese calligraphy with hip-hop music, creating an innovative and artistic gameplay experience. In Vib-Ribbon, you control the character Mojibri, who raps while performing calligraphy. As Mojibri moves along a paper scroll, you write characters in sync with the music. The game demands precise timing to match the rhythm, with smooth strokes leading to flawless raps and mistakes breaking the flow. The player uses the PlayStation 2 controller to perform calligraphy strokes in time with the music. Different buttons correspond to different strokes. For instance, pressing a button starts a stroke, and releasing it ends the stroke. Press and release the buttons in sync with the beat to create smooth, accurate strokes. With the 2004 release of Vib-Ripple for the PlayStation 2, the great thing about this game was that we got to see a return of our hero from the original Vib-Ribbon game, with Vibri, the wireframe rabbit, making a return. The game revolved around manipulating photos to uncover hidden objects. Players can use in-game images or import their own photos, making each level a personalized experience. Each photo was transformed into a bouncy interactive surface where players control the protagonist, Vib-Ribbon, to find pita eggs. As players controlled Vib-Ribbon, who jumps and bounces across the photo's surface, the player is supposed to listen for audio cues and watch for visual hints to locate the eggs. Once all pita eggs are found, you can move on to the next photo or replay the current one for a better score. With Vib-Ribbon, it felt more on the weirder side of things rather than a more populist appeal. And after that, Vib-Ribbon once again slowly made her exit out of the world of gaming, as she was never seen again, nor was the franchise ever further expanded on. Well, that's not entirely true. So, it should be noted that I was only half telling the truth about Vib-Ribbon never having a North American release. Vib-Ribbon was quietly released on October the 2nd, 2014 for the PlayStation 3 as a digital download-only game via the PlayStation Store. The thing is, most gamers knew nothing about the game. It was quietly put up on the PlayStation Store and just sat there with no promo or marketing. A bonus about the digital release was that it was compatible with the PSP and the PlayStation Vita, making it one of the more versatile releases of a digital-only game. But after that, that was the last time we ever saw a Vib-Ribbon game or a game from the Vib-Ribbon world. Vib-Ribbon echoed a very similar trend in how the Parappa franchise quietly disappeared after the PlayStation 2 era of games, with Nana Onsha going on to create very different kinds of games altogether, like Tamagotchi games for the Nintendo DS in 2005, or Haunt in 2012 for the Xbox 360. None of their games were really ever situated in the realm of rhythm games any longer for the most part, and the closest thing we got to anything feeling like Parappa the Rapper was a game called Major Minor's Majestic March for the Nintendo Wii, released in 2009, with the art direction being by the same artist who was responsible for the look of the Parappa games, Rodney Allen Greenblatt. The industry and attitude towards rhythm-based games felt like it sort of changed almost overnight. The rhythm genre of gaming isn't completely dead, so I hope I'm not coming off here as claiming that it's a dead genre. With games like Beat Saber, the Just Dance franchise, and the ever-present Dance Dance Revolution games at your local Dave & Buster's, the genre still has a presence in gaming, but it sort of seems to have fallen out of the more populist realms of gaming and console gaming only because it's a genre that has a very short lifespan when it comes to replay value. And when you take into account the novelty side of it with things like Rock Band or Guitar Hero, it did sort of give gamers a bit of fatigue when it came to rhythm-based music games at its peak. I mentioned the medium of visual art, music, and cinema at the start of this review in an effort to correlate that with every great beginning of a genre within any form of a medium, there is always a sort of ending within any given genre. With Vib-Ribbon, to me, it does and should stand out as more of a footnote in rhythm-based gaming. It was created by a game company that gave us one of the PS1's most popular game characters, Parappa the Rapper, and with Nana Onsha essentially creating a foundation of how rhythm-based games should be, I feel like every game they made in this genre should be worthy of a history lesson, especially if you're a fan of the original PlayStation. The closest thing we ever got to Nana Onsha making a new rhythm-based game was a cancelled PS4 title. Project Rap Rabbit announced in 2017 as a Kickstarter campaign. However, the campaign sadly flopped, only managing to raise $200,000 US out of the needed $1 million US. Because of this setback, work on the game was stopped completely. It's kind of sad when you think about it, really. Not even the makers of Parappa the Rapper being able to get funding for a game these days. Furthermore, I think it's also sad that gamers were just not all that interested in having a rapping game where you played as a new character that wasn't from the Parappa the Rapper universe or Vib-Ribbon universe. Were gamers in 2017 still in rhythm fatigue from Guitar Hero and Rock Band? Who knows? I will always love the Parappa the Rapper franchise and any rhythm-based game that Nana Onsha or Masaya Matsuura puts out. To me, it's a bit more than nostalgia. They essentially created a genre in gaming that gave birth to many other rhythm games in the video game industry. Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Select Gaming. If you like what you've seen and heard, give us a like and subscribe. This is Dusty Maxwell, and we'll see you on the next one.